Yeah, madam. Shall we start, madam?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, madam. So, dear participants, we were back over here for the eighth session of the faculty development program on smart signal processing and its applications, sponsored by Atal Academy, organized by Department of EC and IT Andhra Pradesh. Now, I request my scholar Lokesh to give a brief overview of the biodata of Dr. Lalita. Please, over to you, over to you, Lokesh. Lokesh, please.
Good morning to all. I would like to thank I would like to thank first my guide, Dr. Pulikishore Kumar sir, and my HOD, uh, Dr. Kiran Kumar Gurala sir, and from the Department of EC, a very thanks to a very hearty welcome to Dr. Lalita Vadlamani Madam from the participants and the Department of EC. She did her PhD in the ISC Bangalore and ME in the ISC Bangalore and B in the from Osmania University. And her work experience includes connection. She did her work experience includes 3 years from three companies from Honeywell Technology Solutions Lab, Bangalore, and Qualcomm India Limited, Private Limited, and Connection Systems. She uh, uh, and her honors include uh, we 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 not able to include uh, we not able to include all of her honors, but some of her honors are gold medal for topper of EC department in Osmania University in 2003, and she is a All India number one rank in the GATE exam in 2003 batch, and she is the recipient of TCS Research Scholarship 2011, and she is a recipient of Professor I.S.N. Murthy Medal for Best ME Student in Signal Processing 2005, and her professional activities include she is a reviewer for IEEE Transactional Information Theory, IEEE Transactions in Wireless Communications in various conferences, etc. And she is also volunteer for International Conference on Signal Processing and Communication 2010 held in Bangalore, India. Next. And her current research includes coding for distributed storage, coding for distributed computing, index coding, and coded rebalancing, polar codes, uh, and Reed and Muller codes, coded blockchains, coded and decoded based on deep learning. And I will now forward to Lalita Vadlapani Madam.
This is a short introduction what I can give, madam. Thank you so much. If any mistake is there, please pardon us. I request you to take the session, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore, and thank you, Lokesh, for the kind introduction. Thanks, Dr. Kishore, for inviting me to give this session. Uh, yeah, so the way I would like to do it is perhaps, you know, I would like to perhaps keep, because I'm doing this from my iPad, I'll perhaps keep my video off and share the screen, and you can keep writing notes. So that's what I'll do, and you can kind of give me feedback in between. Please unmute yourself and ask questions. Okay. And yeah, so I'll go somewhat slow on this. Yeah, this is a topic that I'm going to cover today is, so please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, madam. It is visible.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Okay, so the topic that I'm going to cover today is sparse FFT and its applications. Today is, I think, 20th, 10, 21. Okay. Um, so, I mean, just a disclaimer that this is not listed as, let's say, one of my active research areas. But I mean, I did go through this area in sufficient depth, so but did not get a chance to actively pursue research in this. Okay. So, I mean, that is related to signal processing. My research expertise is in mostly coding theory. I am interested in this particular application, but I mean, in this particular area of sparse fast Fourier transform and applications, but just did not get a proper window to start working on it. Okay, so nonetheless, I think I'll cover some of the things here. And also, perhaps I would like to mention that the results that I'm going to cover today are, let's say, most of the results came in the span from 2012 to 2014, I guess, something around that time frame. Okay. So after that, also there have been results in these areas, but I would not say perhaps they are, you know, kind of so fundamental that they can be covered in a program like this. For example, they're more advanced results which may not be of interest to the audience of this kind. So that is the reason the topics that I will cover will be uh, I mean, the research would have happened something like around 2012 to 2014, and most of those results are from a group from MIT. There was active research going on in this topic in MIT. So I think the three papers that I will cover are all from more or less the same group. Okay, so there's one more result which I'll mention from a group from Berkeley around the same time, but that I'll only kind of touch upon in the end. Okay. um, yeah, so just to say that the topics which perhaps I want to cover are, I mean, the subtopics which I want to cover are, one is, GPS synchronization using sparse FFT. Yes. So then we will do spectrum sensing again, using the same, using SFFT. Okay. These two are, I would say, the applications. So I said sparse FFT and its applications, but the way it is I'll cover applications in the start and actual one particular sparse FFT algorithm later. Okay. Because the applications are slightly more easier to understand. Though I am covering, let's say, these two applications, what I saw was that this particular algorithm is also kind of recently applied in radar signal processing as well. Okay, so I've seen applications of this sparse Fourier transform in the radar as well. But this is one of the recent application which I will perhaps not cover, but interested people can go back and look for papers in that area. Okay. So these are some of the applications of sparse FFT, but actually, I mean, in the sense, it can be applied to multiple places, but these are ones which require, whose algorithms are like somewhat different, and you can kind of see what's going on. Okay, so first I just want to cover DFT and sparsity. What do I mean by sparsity? So I'll cover some definitions and maybe set up some notation. So let's say I have a signal X. Okay, I'll just write it slightly differently. Maybe X and X. Okay, so these are both vectors of length n, taking values from complex field. Complex numbers. Okay, and one is the So this is your frequency domain signal. What I mean is discrete signal, all those things I am assuming you. And this is a time domain signal. So, and the DFT, or the discrete Fourier transform, is given by the following expression: XF. F is your index of the frequency, is sigma L equal. So this notation is maybe not standard as in the textbooks, but I'm just using it because maybe I would have picked from one of the papers. Okay. So minus J 2 pi L F by N. Okay. So L is the index of the time signal, and F is a frequency index of the frequency domain signal, right? So this is something which you know, all of you know. So this is just your discrete Fourier transform. You can write the inverse Fourier transform expressions too. Okay. So what is the computational complexity? The computational complexity of FFT, so FFT is fast Fourier transform, which is a computationally efficient version of computing the DFT. So the computational complexity of FFT is, anybody, if you know, you can. So in terms of n, so n is the length of the signal. Yeah. So what is the computational complexity of the FFT? So you have to unmute and speak, because I'm not looking at the chat box. So you might, I mean, in case there are anything also, I'll not be able to see them. If any of you know what is the computational complexity, because that is the basic thing that we are going to, let's say, improve in this tutorial, in this talk.
Yeah, it is n log n, madam.
Okay. So it's O of n log n. Thank you. Okay. So which is already very good. So it's not, so one thing is, this is, not, it's not linear per se, but just almost close to linear, right? So almost close to linear. Okay. So I'll, but what we are looking at is a special class of signals. So if I was not given any other information about the signal, then the FFT is the best that you can do. Okay. But if I am given additional information that the signal is sparse, okay, and in particular it is sparse in the frequency domain. Okay. So this information is given to me. Then what can we do? So that is the question that we are going to ask. So before going to some notation of that, examples of sparse signals. Okay. So generally audio, video, images, all these are sparse in the frequency domain. Image, audio, MRI, all these signals are sparse in the frequency domain. In particular, I'll give you for a video a typical 8x8 block in a frame. Okay, and if you take its frequency domain, then it has only 7 non-negligible, close to. So all these are approximate numbers that, okay, non-negligible coefficients. Whereas the actual number is 64, right, when you take the 2D DFT. So which means 89% close to are negligible. Okay, they are very small. Okay. So that is So these are examples of sparse signals. So what is the question that we want to ask is question is, can DFT be computed, okay, using lesser number of samples and faster when the signal has sparse DFT. Okay. So here you should note two things. One is what we are saying is lesser number of samples and faster, both. Because if we are using n, all the n samples, to be able to do the computation, even accessing those n samples will have O of n complexity, right? And maybe you will be just saving on that log n or whatever, right? So in general, the kind of speed up that we want is twofold. One is in terms of sample complexity, okay, which is the number of samples accessed to compute the DFT, okay, and computational complexity, which is the number of operations. So these operations typically may be like multiplications slash additions, but typically it is only, I think, multiplication, so that should be enough. Okay, so multiplications, additions performed to compute the DFT. And in your original DFT, this is O of n, right? Means it is actually n, and the computational complexity is O of n log n. And we want to improve both these numbers when we are said that the signal is sparse.
Madam,
Huh.
what's the role of
Sorry? Okay. Okay, so this is actually, it's called big O notation. So, if you are saying that some function is O of n, okay, so then what it means is that that function f of n, let's say, is upper bounded by some constant times n. So that is meant by big O notation. So actually, if you kind of see, it's part of computation theory, or that there is big O notation, then there is theta notation, and so on. Okay, so each one, all that it says is, you are only, I mean, when I say big O of n, all that I am not mentioning to you right now is what is the multiplying constant which is involved. Okay, and in general, suppose even if I take n plus log n, for example, okay, so this also is O of n, because log n grows much slower than n. Okay, so if some function is, let's say, just n plus log n, if f of n is n plus log n, even that is actually O of n, because you can always upper bound this by some constant times n. Okay, so when people are writing this O kind of notations, they are increasing something to infinity. I mean, in the sense, n is growing. Okay, but what we are ignoring is if there are any constants involved in the computation, that is kind of absorbed in this O notation. Okay, so that's all I can say for now. Maybe it's not It is good that you kind of go and refer to this big O notation in more detail, but for now I think that suffices for our purposes of what is meant by this big O notation. Okay. So, I mean, when I say sample complexity is of n, the constant can be 1 also. I mean, I'm not saying that the constant is, the reason I'm writing O of n there is later maybe I'll write something like O of square root of n, right? So, in which case, it will be like using the common notation for all the sample complexities and computation complexity. Okay. So again, for some of these things, it's like, maybe for FFT, you know exactly what is the computational complexity. Maybe there's no need for writing the big O notation. But whatever I am going to tell you today and all these things, right? Because some constants are ignored and so on, it is useful to do the big O notation because you will not know exactly what is the computational complexity to the scalars, I mean whatever are multiplying them, that you will not know. Okay, sure. So I'll continue. I want to define what is meant by exactly k sparse signal. Okay, so what it means is, as a signal is said to be exactly k sparse if k out of n DFT coefficients are non-zero. Okay. So if you go back and see our examples as to the video and all that, whatever I have told, right? I mean, if you kind of look at it, none of the signals are exactly a k sparse in general. Okay, so it's not that all the only k out of the n are non-zero and rest all are zero. That's not how it works in general. But exactly k sparse is a somewhat an ideal situation. Okay. What happens in most of the actual signals is approximately k sparse. Okay. So in which case, I mean, one way to think about it, I will kind of define it more precisely just in a minute. But the way to think about it is, so the DFT of a signal can be thought of as exactly k sparse signal, and DFT of exactly k sparse signal plus noise. Okay, and all the video and all that I have told you is actually falls into this approximately k sparse category because none of them are exactly k sparse. So it's not that only k coefficients are non-zero and rest everything is zero. That's not how it works. It's just said that 89% are negligible, so you can assume that all of them are noise. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So generally what you want is that, so whenever you compute a DFT, right, I want to compute, so what are the metrics? So let's say I come up with let's say we come up with the DFT algorithm. Okay. So then of course what I want is I have an estimate of the DFT, and that will be actually equal to, so whenever you do FFT, the estimate is equal to the actual DFT. Okay, so this is the, if you want to say, estimated DFT. and this is your actual DFT. Okay, we want them both to be equal at all the locations. Okay, so that's what you do when you're doing FFT, right? So you're getting exactly the DFT of the signal. But the kind of algorithms that we will look at, right? So these two, x hat will not be equal to x. Okay? There will be some difference between the two. Okay? But then if there is some difference, there should be some way of measuring that difference, right? Okay, and the kind of metric that is used to measure the difference between x and x hat, okay, is the L2 norm. Okay, so L2 norm is written this way. But have you heard of L2 norm or no? If you would not have, so this is nothing but f equals 1 to
Yes,
n.
ma'am. L2
Yeah,
norm, L0 norm,
yeah.
Kishore sir told
Okay.
in
So this,
last lecture.
yeah. So you want to somehow minimize this L2 norm. If in case minimize the L2 norm, in case you are not, having it exact, but still you want to come up with an algorithm which kind of minimizes the L2 norm between the estimated DFT and the actual DFT. Okay. So this is all what comes in the case of approximately k-sparse. Okay. I will not perhaps have time to go into analysis of these L2 norms and actually showing that it is, it is bounded and all those things. So what we will do after this thing is mostly what I will, for each of the settings, I will just do the algorithm itself, okay, and perhaps some things related to the complexity. So there are several things that we have to do. One is to describe the algorithm, okay, characterize its sample complexity, computational complexity, and then also see how the L2 norm is somehow minimum, right? I might not have time to go through that last part, which is the L2 norm part. Okay, we will, for each setting, we will describe the algorithm and perhaps look at the complexity. But the other part, it will take, in general, a lot more time for analysis. Okay, fine. So maybe I will just go through some prerequisites which are required to describe the algorithms. Prerequisites, properties of DFT. So there are two properties, two of them, which will come recurringly in these things. Okay, so whenever you are doing sparse FFT algorithms, two of the properties are in general very helpful. One is the subsampling property. And second is permutation property. And even in subsampling, you can do two. So this could be in time or in frequency. I'll derive one of it and perhaps just state the other, and then we will. The other derivation I will leave it to you. It is exactly the same thing which happens. So now first we will do subsampling in frequency domain. Okay. So So let b be some integer which divides n, and x is your time domain signal, capital X your frequency domain signal, right? Okay, and you are kind of saying that xf is not, all right. Okay, the subsample signal, I'll call it as YF. Okay. So YF is nothing but XF times N over B. Okay. So this is subsampled in the way that you are only picking. So normally your indices are 0, 1 up to N minus 1. Okay. Here, if you see, I'll have only 0, 1 up to, so F will run only from 0, 1 up to B minus 1. Is that correct? The number of them? So let's just take an example. Let's say N is 15 and B is 5. Okay. So in that case, I have N by B is 3, and then I want YF is equal to X3F, right? So which means I'm looking at X0, X3, X6, X9 and X12. So this will run only up to 14. So X12 is, so this is my Ys. But what are the Ys? They are Y0, Y1, Y2, Y3, Y4. Okay. And the number of them, if you see, is actually equal to B, which is equal to 5. Right? So what?
Ma'am, it
So
is dilation, right?
sorry?
It's kind of dilation.
No, it's just called subsampling,
Okay, ma'am.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
So
Is it some kind of a
see,
downsampling, madam?
no, see, there are other things which are maybe applied even to yeah. So it's also called downsampling, decimation, all these kind of things. So I will just use the terminology as subsampling, but maybe if you refer to it in a standard DSP textbook or so, they might call it decimation or they might also call it downsampling.
Downsampling is it for the non-uniform sampling also? Maybe does it represent non-uniform sampling also?
Maybe you can, I think, but see, the premise of sampling itself is somehow that you are uniformly sampling it, right? So if I say it's a downsample signal and it is just a subset of your previous thing, of course I don't know how to represent it, but maybe, yeah, maybe it's possible. I really have not come across this non-uniform thing where some properties are studied, for example, right? I mean, like for example, here the thing that I'm going to tell you is that if you subsample in one of the domains, you are actually doing aliasing in the other domain. So that's what we are going to prove. Okay. For non-uniform sample signals, you see, non-uniform comes into picture when you have continuous time and you are taking non-uniform samples. But here, I am starting off with a discrete time system. Even okay, even then you can do non-uniform. But I don't know if there is a neat way to study any of the properties after you do the non-uniform sampling. Okay, so for now we'll assume that it is all uniform. Okay, if there is anything that I find, let's say about non-uniform, I'll let you know, at least with respect to few properties in case they are there. Okay, so
Okay, ma'am.
yeah, so the time domain, corresponding time domain signals, signal of x and y are related as follows. So this is small y. I'll just use small yi. Sigma L equal to 0 to n over b minus 1 x times lb plus I. So this is the relation. The reason it is aliasing is, if you see, the ith index here is obtained by adding xi plus b, xi plus 2b, and so on. Okay, so all these are getting added just to give your one time domain sample in y. Okay, so we'll just see the proof of this. I mean, I'll not go through too many proofs, but then but these properties, at least it's still I think worth proving them. Okay, so first we'll start with the frequency domain. I use a forward DFT relation, and then so this is nothing but 0 to n minus 1 xl e to the minus j 2 pi f n by n times b. Okay, so this particular summation, I'm going to break that into two summations. M equals 0 to b minus 1, L equal to 0 to n by b minus 1, x times lb plus m. See, all that I have done here is somehow change this variable L, changed L to LB plus M. So, but this was a single variable. Here there are two variables, and if you see, I have made their the ranges in such a way that when you look at all possible values for L times B plus M, it is 0 to n minus 1. So it's just a way of rewriting, but that way of rewriting kind of helps you. So this is nothing but M equals 0 to B minus 1. Inside is what you want, n by B minus 1 x plus M. Okay, and here if you see, there are two terms in the exponent which are a product, and first term, if you cancel things with nb and so on, it is e to the minus j 2 pi times nb gets cancelled, so it is L times f and e to the minus j 2 pi m times f n, again n get cancelled, so f by b. Okay, and this actually is equal to 1 because it's just 2 pi times some integer. Okay, so this, if you see now, it is sigma m equals b 0 to b minus 1, L equals 0 to n by b minus 1 plus m e to the minus j 2 pi m f by b. Okay, and this is nothing but, if you want to say, it is b point DFT of the aliased signal, which is the sum of x times L b plus m. Okay, so you can look at it and for some time and ask me any questions in this proof.
Madam, can I ask one question?
Yes.
So the time domain relation between x and y indicates that if you would like to find out one sample yi, we are supposed to sum up the samples that we are going to have for x. Few samples we are going to add. Is it something like that, madam? Because the summation, it is running from L equals 0 to n by b minus 1, x suffix lb plus I. So to get one specific yi, we are going to add a few samples in time domain of the signal x.
Yes, that is correct. And that too uniformly spaced samples of x.
Okay, uniformly spaced samples we are adding.
Yeah.
Okay, madam.
Okay. Yeah. So this is, if you see, it is subsampling in frequency domain. Okay, so you can have a similar relation which is subsampling in time domain. Okay, it will be exactly similar. So in the sense, suppose if I say yi equals xi times, let's say, n by b, right? So then what I'll have is yf will be sigma m equal to 0 to again n by b minus 1 of x times bm plus f. I think that's the kind of relation that we had right here. Yeah. So it's exactly the same thing. There's no difference. I mean, in sense, between time domain and frequency domain, the aliasing, the way it happens is exactly the same. So let me just verify that, and then we will go to the next property.
Madam, adding samples in the time domain is something like a time domain aliasing.
Yes, correct.
So we are intentionally making the time domain aliasing so that we are going to have subsample sequence in the frequency domain.
Yes, correct.
And the reverse is the case in the equation which you have written here.
Yes, that is true.
But if time domain signal waveform shape is getting affected because of this time domain aliasing, how come it's possible to have the same spectrum amplitudes at the specified locations of the frequency?
No, it's not exactly the same, right? See, the thing is, the way to think about it is like this, okay? Suppose if I have I will explain this more through examples, let's say,
Okay, ma'am.
later. Only thing is, quick answer to that is, see, if you know that your spectrum has, let's say, only 2 frequency components, right? I will not know the exact location. Somehow that I will have to find out. But it is okay if I kind of, alias in the frequency domain, because all that I'm doing in the frequency domain is adding that with zeros. Okay, so at least the actual spectrum value will not change. So the way sparsity is helping is that when you have sparse signal, which means that let's say only 2 of the frequency components are non-zero and rest all are zero, most likely, even if when you alias them, of course it depends on where these 2 frequency components are, but when you alias them also, you are just adding zeros to one of the components, right? And when you add zeros, nothing will change. The location will change, but the amplitude and all will remain the same, right? So that is how aliasing will help you in computing using lesser point DFTs to be able to at least compute the spectrum that you want of the sparse signal.
So you mean to say that because the signal is sparse, even if we perform time domain aliasing, we are adding with zeros, it doesn't affect the signal much.
No, I'm not saying. See, the thing is, you will not do time domain aliasing. That's what. So, you will do frequency domain aliasing. Okay, so this is what you will do. Okay, so you will do time domain subsampling. Then it gets aliased in the frequency domain. Okay, and even that with that we'll be able to somehow recover the DFT coefficients. So that is the idea.
Okay, ma'am.
Right. So this is one of the property which is subsampling in time and frequency domain. The other one is permutation property. Anyway, we'll see both of them. See, in the algorithms, each one of these will be used at different times. But I thought anyway, let's do the prerequisites at once instead of doing it later, so that there's some warm up. So the second one is the permutation property. Okay. Okay. So we'll have a permutation The permutation is parametrized by two numbers, sigma and tau. Okay, and the permutation itself and denoted by p sigma tau. Okay, and the way it is related, so if I apply this permutation to p sigma tau of x, this is what I do. Okay, so then I'll get another thing y. Okay, and the way they are related is as follows. So yi is nothing but x sigma I plus tau. Okay, so sigma is multiplication factor and tau is the additive factor. Okay, and what we are saying is that sigma has to be invertible mod n. Okay, then only this is a permutation, otherwise it is not. Okay, so I mean, why is this as a special thing? The reason is, so suppose if n equal to 6, okay, and then I pick, let's say, sigma equal to 2. Then the question is sigma invertible mod n?
Madam, can I ask a question here?
Yeah. So I mean, you can tell me the answer, or means okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
See, because you asked the question is sigma invertible mod n. I just want to know what is the operator p that is being operated on the input signal x. Because you have different two parameters sigma and tau.
Oh, no. So this is for, see, I'm just trying to give you an example where sigma is not invertible mod n. So that is the reason I have come up with this. Okay. Later I'll define what is the operator anyway. I mean, this actual operation that you're doing is this only. But the thing is, what I want to drive home the point is that, see, every yi there should be a corresponding, what is meant by permutation? Permutation is like if I have x0 to x, let's say phi, and y0 to y phi, everything should go to everything else, right? Okay, and that will happen only if sigma is invertible mod n. If it is not, then it might happen that two x's, let's say, are going to the same y and so on. Those kind of problems will happen. So as long as sigma is invertible mod n, this yi equals x times sigma, I mean x of sigma I plus tau is a permutation. Okay, that is the thing. But can you tell me if sigma equal to 2 is invertible mod n? Means the thing is, can you find another number sigma inverse? Okay, such that, or let's say, so let's say, is there an alpha such that alpha times sigma equal to 1 mod 6, okay, where the sigma is actually equal to 2. So is the question clear what I'm trying to ask? So you pick numbers only 0 to 5, that is enough actually. So you pick numbers, because mod 6 means 6 becomes 0 anyway, right? So you pick any number 0 to 5, and but your sigma is equal to 2. Does any number give you 1 mod 6?
Modulus operator will give the remainder. So 1 mod 6 means you will be getting the remainder 1 only.
Yes,
If I try to divide with this.
correct. But does there exist an alpha such that 2 times, I mean, is there an alpha such that alpha times sigma equals 1?
So if sigma is equals to 2, then alpha should be a fraction number 1 by 2. Then only it will be equals to 1.
Yeah, but alpha fractional is not possible anyway. Means we are not looking at rationals. We are only looking at integers, right? Because all these indices are integers only. So we are operating on integers.
Then it is not possible.
Then it is not possible. So that's why this additional condition is required, that sigma is invertible mod n. Okay. Otherwise, it is not. So otherwise, it is not a one-to-one mapping. Okay. So this I to I sigma plus tau is not a one-to-one mapping if sigma is not invertible modulo n. Okay. So that is the reason it is required. And permutation means you are permuting the indices, which means I need a one-to-one mapping. So that's why it is required that sigma is invertible. Okay. So as of now, I have only described the time domain signal. The DFT of x and y are related as follows. Okay. So can you interpret this relation? So what is happening is there is permutation in the time domain. So what is happening in the frequency domain?
So it is being multiplied with a scaling factor to mass j 2 pi by n tau p.
Yeah, but is that the only thing which is happening? See, here also you should see this sigma p and p. Okay, so it's not that a particular xp is going to the same index first of all, right? P is going to sigma p, right? So which means that there is permutation plus phase shift or phase rotation in frequency domain.
So the frequency indices are also getting shuffled then.
Yes, yes. The frequency indices also getting shuffled. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So it is permutation plus phase rotation in the frequency domain. Okay. Fine. So these are the prerequisites, and these are the maybe the only properties that we will use to be able to describe the algorithms. But then the different properties we'll use at different times. So whenever I'm using something, I'll tell which property we are referring to. So with this, I will start with the GPS synchronization problem. So any questions till this point? I'll just take a pause and then.
Yeah, madam. Before going further, I request the audience participants to ask a few questions over here. Any questions from the participants, please?
Ma'am, I want to ask something that here is actually does the phase rotation. So, ma'am, I came across the fractional Fourier. So there is also some rotation in there. So how it is different from? Can you explain? Hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah. Yes. Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, ma'am. So,
Okay.
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes. What is the question?
Ma'am, the question is that we do the phase rotation in the fractional Fourier transform. So we rotate the signal with some rotation previous same like what I learned from now, that it has also some multiplication term e to the power j omega t plus some tan theta term is there. So how it is the how why we require the phase rotation and how it is different from the fractional Fourier transform?
Uh, okay. So, I mean, I have to kind of make the relation. I'll perhaps answer it in the afternoon session of fractional Fourier transform. But this is not like it is required. It is a consequence of commuting indices. Okay. So it's a property. It's a property of the DFT. It's, I mean, why we will require it comes only because of sparsity. So, like I said, subsampling was important for calculating the sparse DFT, and similarly the the permutation is important to calculate the sparse DFT. Why is it? I think I will kind of point it out when we are actually going through the algorithm of sparse DFT. Permutation property is important
And
to.
ma'am, another thing, ma'am, is that does this sparse Fourier transform is better than the Fourier transform in kind of accuracy in terms of accuracy, or it is just fast to implement?
No, it's fast to implement, and that's why I have said the L2 norm of error and so on. So that is the reason. Uh, it will not be as accurate as FFT. If you want exactly accurate, I think the best way is to just do the fast Fourier transform. That's all. Okay. But given the kind of numbers that you are looking at, okay, so suppose in one of the papers, let's say the kind of numbers that you look at are the samples of the order, let's say 2 power 20. Okay. So number of samples on which they run their algorithms is of the order of 2 power 20. Okay. So if you see this, I mean for the Fourier transform itself is going to be this times log n. Okay, which is maybe even if I take log 2, it is this order. Right, which is huge
Yes, ma'am.
in
N
terms
log
of
n.
complexity.
Yes.
So you don't want that. So if you could do it much faster, but get a less accurate result also, it's fine. As opposed to spending so long to be
Yes,
able
ma'am.
to compute the exact. Right. So that is the. I'll perhaps discuss about in case about fractional transform later. Okay.
Madam, can I take one question, please?
Yeah.
Actually, when you say about the accuracy point of view, is it something like in frequency domain, the accuracy is not that much good, but when we again convert back to the time domain, the accuracy might be improved? Will it happen, madam? Because when we are going to approximate the things, the estimate value of the frequency, whatever we are going to have, if you compare the frequency of the frequency domain of the actual signal, the accuracy is poor, but when we convert back into the time domain from the estimate of frequency domain, then the chance of having the high accuracy, is it possible, ma'am?
No, it's not possible because for the simple reason that see, first of all, DFT is a linear operator, right? So that is one thing, and just by maybe Parson's relation, if energy in one domain is the same as the energy in the other domain, then the energy of the error in one domain will be the same as energy of the error in the other domain. So that is so it will not be any better accurate in the time domain.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. One question was given in the chat box. I'll read it for you, madam. Does the sparsity in frequency domain does not imply sparsity in time domain?
No,
Is the
it
question
doesn't.
asked?
It doesn't. Actually, there is,
I,
there are kind of, if you know, there are kind of uncertainty relations. Okay. So,
I mean, so like if you want the classical kind of uncertainty, so then it is like saying, you cannot determine, you cannot, uncertainty in physics, right? You cannot, let's say, determine position and momentum both accurately at the same time, right? Similarly, uncertainty in signal processing, there are uncertainty results in signal processing. Okay, which so one thing which they kind of say, it's not exactly sparsity, but what they, one version of the result says that if it is bounded, if a signal is bounded in time domain, right, then it is unbounded in frequency domain and vice versa, right? So this is, and similar results can be obtained for discrete also. Okay, so which means
Excuse
most
me,
likely that,
excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am,
yeah.
what you are saying is a Sturm-Liouville problem in math. So Sturm-Liouville asked the same question on the this principle, and they found a Prolet spheroid wave function for that reason, and based on that, they told that the Gibbs phenomenon is less when we change from a square wave to some sin c function in the frequency domain, or the vice versa, the sin c to square wave. So the Gibbs phenomenon is less. So somehow the maximum portion is kind of addressed in the Sturm-Liouville problem.
No, no,
That
yeah,
I
I
want to share.
agree. Yeah. So thank you for that. I think, see, you can always confine your energy to some parts, and that is possible both in in time and the corresponding counterpart in frequency. Also, you can do it. Okay, but only thing is exact sparsity. Okay, in one domain does not imply sparsity in the, okay, or maybe it will say it is not sparse also. Okay, so that is something to
Yes,
keep
ma'am.
in mind. Does
For
not
that I
imply
agree.
sparsity. Yeah,
Thank you, ma'am.
yeah. Thank you. Okay. All right. So we will go through the GPS synchronization problem. I mean, here the way it is, it's not exactly the sparse FFT problem. It's slightly different, but it is interesting the way they have tried and applied it. So I will use it as example. I mean, though I say sparse FFT, it is not exactly that, but it's very, very tailored. Whatever algorithm here I'm going to tell you is not applicable to maybe different settings. It's only applicable to GPS, but they have used a nice trick to somehow reduce the complexity. The reduction in complexity is not that much, but still it's a a neat result. Okay, so what happens in GPS synchronization problem is as follows. So each satellite has what is known as a CDMA code. Okay? And it consists of 1023 chips, and the transmission frequency is this. Okay. So what the receiver does, the receiver has to kind of determine the distance. Okay? But the distance itself comes from the time delay of signal transmission between the satellite and the receiver. So we should be able to somehow estimate this time delay. Okay, and the thing that you have to estimate this time delay is this code, which is maybe 1023 chips long. Okay, so what is done is that the received signal is correlated with delayed versions of the, delayed version of the CDMA code. Okay. And the point at which correlation is maximum, at which the correlation is maximum, is said to be the time delay. So the only thing is here there are some, it's not like you are just sending code once and you are leaving it. You are sending code again and again and again. Okay, so that's what happens. So whenever there is a transmission, so maybe there is a, 1023 length code, but then again and again. Okay. So when you do correlation, I think somehow you are still assuming that I want to determine what is the delay within that frame. Okay. So additional integer multiple delays, I think you have some other way of determining it. But this fractional delay within that code is done using correlation. Okay. So I will just write a little bit mathematically what the operation is, right? And this I'll call that as convolution based GPS synchronization. Okay. So what I have is a CDMA code, which is C, which is, you can think of it as C0 to Cn minus 1. Maybe it's just a, BPSK kind of a signal, plus ones, minus ones, okay, of size n, and received signal x, which is x0, x1 up to xn minus 1. Okay. So you want to somehow correlate these two, but you are using convolution for that. Okay. So the relation between correlation and convolution, okay. So that I will just write here. It is C minus n. Okay. So what it means is I am flipping the whole thing. All right. Is that clear? The flipping the whole thing means I'll have Cn minus 1 to C0. That's what I'll have. Okay. And that I am convolving with the x signal. Okay. So this is this operation is convolution. Okay. See, I could have written directly what correlation is, but here what I'm saying is convolution. I want to represent correlation in terms of convolution. So which means we have to flip one signal. Okay. And this one is correlation in terms of convolution. Okay. So the length of the signal still is what? Okay.
2n plus 1.
No, that is if you are doing linear, right? But if you are doing cyclic?
It will be the same as n.
It's the same as n, right? So the length is still n. Okay. So now you are doing, let's say the time index is t, then I am going to look at what is the maximum value of the correlation. Okay. What is the time at which that correlation is maximum? And that is what I want to determine. Okay. So what this Rmax
T is in that length n signal which you have obtained by doing the cyclic kind of convolution, right? What is the maximum time index? Okay, that range will be from 0 to n minus 1. What is the value at which it is becoming maximum? That is what I'm interested in, because that will help me determine the delay, and based on that the distance.
Ma'am, I have two questions if you permit me.
Yes, please.
So the CDMA code which we are receiving, the C value, it will be readily available with us.
Yes, yes. So
Whatever the code that we are receiving, that is there with us readily. But the time synchronization we have to maintain, madam. Because at what time we are going to receive the signal and what time we are going to perform the correlation between the locally generated signal with the received signal. If the time synchronization doesn't maintain, then the delay what we are expecting, it might be not the true delay that.
No. So this performing these things, the receiver chain is pretty fast. I mean, see, all these things happen in so less time, right? So that delay, see, the timestamp that you will have of the received signal is exactly when you received it. Okay. If there are any corrections later, you can apply small corrections. But I mean, what it means is the delay that you are calculating is exactly for the time that you receive the signal. Rest of the computations do not matter. You can, for all purposes, you can assume that it is almost happening instantaneously, because this is just like, these are not even long lengths. It is just 1024 kind of length of the signal, which is pretty easy to calculate on any hardware.
Okay, ma'am. Now the second question is why cyclic convolution? Straight away we can do the correlation, right? Why the terminology cyclic convolution came into picture, and what is the benefit we will be having if we use cyclic? Because both represent the same, if I'm not wrong. But is there anything extra information behind this cyclic convolution?
No. So see, you could do cyclic correlation also, no problem. Okay, it's exactly the same thing. The reason I'm writing it here convolution is because next step will be somewhat motivated by the convolution. Okay, so the complexity of doing this is what? The complexity of doing this operation is like, say, I'm performing convolution, which is like what? N multiplications. So that is what I will perform for every single value of t, right? So, and I have, so n multiplications for each t, right? And the number of t's itself is n values for t, right? So if you do it brute force like the way here, to be able to calculate this t tilde, the number complexity is O of n square, because n multiplications and n for each value of t, right? Okay, so what we will do next is what I'll call FFT based GPS synchronization. Okay, so whatever convolution, the reason I have expressed the previous thing as convolution is because you know that in the frequency domain it's just multiplication, right? So but the same thing is not true for correlation, so that is the reason I had to do that, express it in terms of convolution. So here I have the received signal, maybe x. Okay, so then what you do is you perform inverse, FFT on that, okay, and then you do a multiplication of FFT of the CDMA code, right? And then after multiplying, it's just taking IFFT, right? And then I have an output in which somewhere there is a peak. You just have to determine wherever is the peak. Okay, so determine.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Huh.
The CDMA, FFT of CDMA will be complex conjugate.
No, it is not. See, any
Else it will be not uh, shift, flipped.
sorry.
If we
Can
do
you?
not do
Oh,
the
yeah. You're right. So, I'm not doing this. I'm doing shift. This is what you're saying, is it?
yes, for that we
Okay.
need complex conjugate.
Yeah, correct. That's right. Okay. So, which means, so now you see what is the complexity. Okay. This FFT complexity is n log n. And similarly here, it is n log n. Right? Here what I am doing is, and I mean, see, the FFT of the CDMA code doesn't even matter because you can pre-compute and store it also, right? So I need not have to write here as n log n, that is fine. Okay. But here I'm doing n multiplications. Okay. Again, IFFT is n log n, right? So what is the total complexity? It is n log n plus maybe n plus n log n. But if you see what is it in terms of order, right? This all these additions and all do not matter. Okay, that's why this order notation is helpful. This is still of the order of n log n. Okay, because when I have n log n 2 times, it's just a constant factor multiplying that n log n, which means in order sense it's still n log n only. Okay. So what was the previous complexity? It was O of n square if you were doing everything in time domain. Okay. So all computations in time domain, then you were having O of n square. Right? But now it is O of n log n. So O of n log n is much faster than O of n square because what is the multiplying factor? N has reduced to log n. Right? So FFT based thing is already very good. Okay. So now what we will do is we'll see how to introduce the sparse algorithms. Okay. And save something. Okay. It's not that actually I would say in this case the saving is not great, but the algorithm is somewhat neat. Okay. A simple trick which will save somewhat because order of n log n is already very good. Number one. And the second thing is the numbers here are not that big. Okay. So the numbers that I was talking about before for sparse FFT is what 2 power 20, that number of samples. Here it is just 1024 samples or slightly more. It's not that efficient. I mean, in the sense that the complexity is not, improvement per computation is not that great. Okay, but the thing is the way these people actually motivate this thing is that by saying that when GPS is running on a receiver all the time, right? Any saving that you get in computations is still a saving. Okay, so that's how they motivate it. But the order reduction in terms of complexity is not too much. So what we will do is I will present a sparse IFFT based algorithm. Okay, so what is the order complexity? It is O of n of square root of log n. Okay, so if you see n is still remaining the same, only log n has reduced to square root of log n. Okay, which is log n reducing to square root of log n is not too much of an improvement. Okay, but again, as I said, the way they motivate it is by saying that because GPS runs all the time, any saving that you get, it's like that is amplified so much because it is running continuously, kind of. Okay, yeah. So to be able to present the algorithm, first we will look at two stages of this. So because there are two stages, one is the IFFT part. Okay. The second stage is the IFFT part. Okay. Okay. And determine the location of maximum. Okay. So if you see, the output is sparse. Okay. The output in time domain is sparse. Okay. Right? And that we want to somehow reduce the number of computations. And in many of these things, the only way to reduce the computation is by using a smaller point FFT. Okay. So here when I'm saying we are using IFFT, we are using an endpoint IFFT. Okay. So now what I want to do is the IFFT block, I want to use an n by p point IFFT. Okay. Where p is some number which is dividing n, let's say. Okay. So what is the relation that you will use is as follows. So this IFFT, I want n by p point. So this is your time domain signal, and the time domain meaning even correlation, I'm just calling it as a time domain signal. Okay. And this is your frequency domain signal. Okay. This one is sparse, which means that, see, wherever it is sparse, you can alias it there. Okay. So which means I want aliased version of this. Okay. So aliased version, also called as binned version if you want. Okay. So which means the frequency domain signal, I want to take a subsampled signal. So here we are doing somewhat reverse engineering. So I will tell you what first happens with the second IFFT block and then tell you what you should do with the first ones. Okay. So this is an n by p point IFFT, right? So which means that the output of the time domain will be n by p points. Okay. Whereas your delay, you wanted it, so t tilde, whatever you wanted to determine, was actually ranging from 0 to n minus 1. Right? So then how do I get this t tilde given only this n by p points? So what will happen is like this. I have an output. So assuming an ideal output, I have a peak somewhere and all zeros everywhere else. Okay. So this I have aliased, right? Then what will happen? So this is from 0 to n minus 1, right? What will happen? I'll still have a peak somewhere, but then I'll have 0 to n by p minus 1, right? So what I know here is some other j, okay? I know what is the index in this 0 to n by p minus 1, what is the maximum value, and that index I know that it is j. But the thing is that j could have resulted because of peak at some number of points, right? Because what is the aliasing relation? If you go back to, subsampling in frequency domain property, right? So then what was the relation that we had? yi is equal to sigma x lb plus I, and L was going from 0 to n by b minus 1. Okay. So, but on the other hand, I think this is for B sample, so I will just write it for the P notation here. Okay, so this is okay. So this is the relation. So which means that this particular peak that you get after Alias diversion, it could have resulted from any one of the p values before aliasing. Is this point clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, which means that, so now, but how do I resolve between those two p values, right? Yes, I cannot say my delay is p, I mean, whatever, 0 to p minus 1, any value it is, that will not give me any information. So, in the sense that is giving me lesser information than what I want. I want exactly what is the value within 0 to n minus 1, what is the delay. But now I'm getting, it could be one of the p values, okay? So then after that, what you do is check the correlation, brute force for all the p values. Okay. So which means that you are still doing c minus n times n. Okay, so times x. Okay, but not all values, because if there are n values, it was becoming n square, right? You are only computing some parts of it, and how many of them I'm going to compute p, and each computation will take n. So the complexity of checking the correlation within the p values which you got is p times n. Okay, so in all these things, again you will get the advantage only if in the end we pick p carefully. Okay, so what is the value of p? Right now I am saying it is some p, right? Even the p you have to pick carefully so that you will get the the advantage of the complexity which I told, right? But that I will come. I mean, I'll just take maybe 1 or 2 slides to be able to say this. Okay, so is it clear now what is happening? What is happening is I am having IFFT, which is n by p point. Okay, I have an output. The output is going to, if I want to say, if you want to say correlation for p values, okay, because the p values which are maximum. Okay, so this is n by p point, and the complexity of this is p times n, right? Okay, so a subset of the blocks, the complexity is something. Let's see. Okay, so but what is the input here? The input here is subsampled frequency domain. I mean subsampled in frequency domain, right? So this is only part of it where you are using the n by p point IFFT. Now you go to the previous part, which is I have a received signal. I had an FFT, okay, and then I am doing the multiplication, okay, and then I am taking the output, and that output is given to these blocks, correct? I mean, here if you see again, this was x and this was c minus n, right? So here again FFT I was using endpoint, correct? And if you continue to use endpoint, then again you will not get any improvement in complexity, because this is what will dominate your complexity and it becomes n log n. Okay, so how to reduce that is the question. So we have reduced the complexity of the second part somehow by introducing this p. How to reduce the complexity of the first part?
Subsampling in frequency domain.
Yes, correct. Okay, so you are using subsampling in frequency domain. Okay,
But how do you get a subsample version in frequency domain? Is by aliasing in time domain. Okay. Right? So you alias your signal in the time domain and also, just subsample these because you are just pre-computing them, right? So when you alias in the time domain, by what factor do you have to alias? Even this you have to make it n by p point. Okay, even the FFT you have to make it n by p point. Right? So alias accordingly. So when you want the subsample signal by factor of p, alias as much as required in the time domain, okay, and do the operations. You will get the subsample signal in the frequency domain, pass it through this IFFT of n by p point, and then take the correlation and so on. Okay. So here there is a small catch. Okay. The catch is that it seems like as if we have not lost anything, and actually it is the case if your output was exactly sparse, in the sense that somehow your output is such that only one is non-zero, rest everything is zero, then you are not losing much by doing this whole thing. You are exactly getting what you want. Okay. But the problem is the CDMA codes and all that, they are not like the correlation is exactly zero at all the other places. There will be some value of the correlation. Okay. And in particular, all these received signals and all come with a lot of noise already added to them. Right. So it is almost like an approximately sparse signal, but not exactly sparse. Okay. So when you do the n log n kind of operations, okay, and try to determine the maximum, right, you will be successful. You will be successful in determining the maximum, and based on of course, the SNR values, right? In a sense, what is the peak value that you have and what are the other peak values that you get, right? Oh, sorry. So that peak value, the peak value that you get using FFT based algorithm, okay, is approximately p times the peak that you get using the sparse algorithm, because here what you are doing is I'm only taking n by p points, right? So the peak that you get is much smaller than the peak that you get when you do the full n log n computation. Okay. So which means that, this directly implies that the SNR performance, with respect to noise performance of this new algorithm will be worse than the noise performance of the n log n algorithm. And even that is not great. We should avoid it. Okay. So somehow we have to make sure that the peaks are the same. Okay. So, but then how do I kind of guarantee or say that the peaks are same? Is any ideas?
So you need to see that the peaks are same for both analog and that is the normal approach and the sparse based approach. How to make the peak?
How to make it? See, because you somehow want to increase the signal strength, right? But using exactly, so maybe I'll just give, because maybe it might be hard to guess. See, the only way you will increase the peak or reduce the noise effect is by averaging. Okay. But or taking more samples. So what you do here is that in order to compute this, earlier what we were taking is n samples of X, right? And that was
For that, if you apply n log n, you were getting some peak or whatever. Now what you do is that you take np samples of x. Okay. So, and which means that you will get multiple correlations, right? Because I'm taking, multiple p times the x signal, right? And then I will determine the peaks in each one of these, which, or add them and take the average and so on. So that kind of a thing. In which case, again, my peak will increase by a factor of p. Okay. So, but then, so when I take this more number of samples, have I lost anything in complexity? So now we will do a quick complexity or the runtime analysis and then show that still we are okay. Okay. So I'll take NP samples and create aliased versions. But because just I'm taking NP samples, already this step complexity is n times p. Okay. Then I do the FFT on these things. So I'll have n by p log n by p when I take the FFT. Okay. Then multiplication is also doing n by p. Sparse IFFT. So this aliasing is somewhat different. Actually, what you are doing is you are taking NP samples, but actually aliasing it to n by p. Okay. So it's not that you are just decreasing once, you are taking multiple copies of it and aliasing all of them to get this n by p samples. Okay. So just keep a note of it. I think it's important to even understand that sparse IFFT is n by p log n by p. Okay. And finally, the correlation you can do in p times n. Okay. So if I say what is the complexity of this whole thing, is this O of p times n plus n by p log n by p. Okay. So this multiplication I am ignoring because this n by p is anyway smaller than n by p log n by p. Okay. So you have to pick a value of p so that this complexity becomes O of n times square root of log n. So what is the value of p that you have to pick?
Root n.
Not root n, because it will be n times root n, right? See, you see the first term, right? So if you, then it becomes n root n, which is bigger than n log n itself. So
One by log root n.
it is actually square root of log n.
Yeah, square root of log n. Yeah, so that's
Right?
yes, sir.
Yeah. So because the first term actually is so n times square root of log n. Okay. And if you see the second term, I can always upper bound it by, I can ignore the p inside the log. Doesn't matter, because if I ignore, I'm only increasing the complexity. That's all. That's fine. But I'll have n by square root of log n times square root of log n, which is n times square root of log n. Right? So that is the value of p. So in many of these things, the way it is done is that you kind of take some of these factors initially as if they are not known. Okay, introduce them as parameters. Okay, then do the analysis, and then in the end kind of say that what is the value that I have to pick based on minimizing the complexity. Okay. Similar thing I think maybe we'll see in a later algorithm also. Right? Okay, so this is what I wanted to say about GPS based synchronization. Any questions here? I will pause.
Yeah, ma'am, does this work for multiple peaks?
Sorry?
Multiple peaks.
Does it work for multiple peaks? That is good. No, it doesn't. Somehow it is very much tuned to the fact that it is one peak. Okay. See, if there are constant number of peaks also, maybe it is okay, because what is it that you are saying? See, wherever there is a peak, but the thing is, see, if there are multiple peaks, what is it that you want to determine? Do you want to determine the locations of each of the peaks?
Yeah, all the 3 peaks. For suppose if it is more than one, all the 3 peaks I would like to find out at which location the peak is going to occur.
Yeah, you can do it. As long as it is constant number of locations, it is still okay.
The point over here is when we are going to perform the aliasing, when we are going to perform the correlation of P points, all the P points, there will be multiple peaks may exist, but ultimately when we perform the aliasing, which sample value is having more contribution, maybe those things we have to identify, I think, because
No, yeah. So you are right in the sense. See, the thing is, this multiple peaks issue. The problem with that is that later we'll see why, how to handle multiple peaks. But then in this particular case, okay, the problem is you cannot work with arbitrary locations of multiple peaks, because it might happen that they are all aliasing to the same bin, right? In which case we have no way of distinguishing them. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in this particular case, it is very important that there be only one peak, because if there are multiple, there is no way of distinguishing if both the locations actually somehow bin to the same bin when you are aliasing it. So then there is no way of distinguishing. This algorithm will not do it. The algorithms that we will see in the afternoon, I think maybe I will start it only in the next session. The algorithms that we will see there actually can handle multiple peaks, okay? Because when I'm saying you can actually determine k-sparse signal, of course the k-sparse means there are multiple peaks anyway, right? So how to get good algorithms for that, I think we'll see in the afternoon session, because I think if I start now, it may not be a logical break. Okay,
ma'am. After lunch we can able to do that thing.
Yes. Okay, and we are resuming at 2:30, right?
Yes, ma'am. 2:30 we will be back over here.
Okay, sure. Any questions now? I'll stop perhaps sharing my screen. I will give this in 2 sets of notes, and maybe I will share it after both the talks are over. Yeah, so any questions more?
Yeah, questions open to the audience, please. They might be hungry. I'm sorry.
No
So we'll be back at 2:30, madam.
Yes. Sure,
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
madam.
Yeah. Thank you.